Thank you, Ms. Kochhar, for joining us on ET Now. Let's start with the kind of mayhem that we're seeing in the markets following the Fed decision. Just like to understand, firstly, do you think this is an overreaction, and also going forward, how long could this kind of a reaction really last for?
Yes, one must understand that any big decision on the part of Fed to gradually even, withdraw the money is a big impact on the market. But at the same time, we also have to understand that, there's no need for overreaction and panic like the kind we are seeing today. I think, in fact, it is a reminder really for all of us to say that what we need to do is to focus on our own economy and get the economy back to growth. Because what has the Fed said? The Fed has said that gradually new purchases would come down. But that doesn't mean that the global liquidity is going to disappear. It still means that markets which continue to perform and continue to be good investment destinations will continue to attract money. So for us, the focus really should be that we actually create India as a great investment destination and attract that part of the money that is willing to come here.
Right, and the other aspect really is the rupee that we're seeing actually in a kind of a free fall. A lot of people are expecting it to possibly fall even further than the 60 per dollar mark. So, what kind of an issue is this from your point of view? Do you think this is a very serious issue which maybe the policymakers need to kind of wake up and take notice of?
Again, I think in a situation where there's panic, the reaction to any of these parameters is always more than what it ought to be, because there is a whole lot of collateral damage that moves around it. So, one is the impact that could happen because of some money moving out. But over and above that, there is the collateral damage because of uncertainty, because of the way people take positions, because of the way speculators think about it. So I think, again, today's situation, what we are seeing today, is in a way over-heightened reaction on this count. What we again need to do is, one, clearly watch what the impact of the measures that have been announced in the past, what impact that's going to have, how do we see our current account deficit moving, and so on. But the second, I come back to the same thing, that everything depends on how do we bring back the fundamental positives of our economy and make India a worthwhile investment destination.
Right. We also saw, the RBI come out with a very hawkish statement this time around, and they did point out the fact that there are a lot of global uncertainties, and of course, the fact that global liquidity could be a big concern. Going forward, how do you see these kind of moves playing into the RBI's policy decisions?
Yeah, I think we have to be prepared for some volatile environment continuing around us for quite some time. And in that context, I think even for the regulator, they have to weigh a lot of parameters before they take any decision. So clearly, yes, one saw inflation easing, but you saw a whole lot of volatility on the currency rates and so on. So I still think that overall, in this financial year, there is still probably scope for some further cut in the policy rates. Clearly, the current situation is very volatile, so it's difficult to say when. But I think in this financial year, a 50 basis points cut or so should still be expected.
But do you believe that the kind of volatility that we're seeing in the rupee, and also, of course, the weakness of the rupee and its impact on the CAD, that could actually kind of delay these rate cuts to possibly the second half of the year?
In a way, it's already delayed. I mean, if this kind of volatility would not have been there, we would have seen some decision in the midterm policy review that happened last week. So, yes, in a way, the impact of that has already happened in the form of some postponement of some of these decisions.
Right, and a lot of bankers have been complaining really that liquidity at this point of time is a very big concern. How concerning is that for you? And as from ICICI Bank's point of view, is liquidity really a constraint as far as giving money to deserving borrowers is concerned?
I think on an overall basis, on a day-to-day basis, it's not that the liquidity is so tight that it becomes a constraint for lending. I think structurally, the system is moving in a comfortable manner, in fact, as far as liquidity is concerned. But the bigger point is that even today, the borrowings of the banks in LAF are much beyond the RBI's tolerance limit as well of 1% of NDTL. So I think when the system is functioning with such large borrowings, while there is no day-to-day concern about structural liquidity, but this is a situation which then doesn't allow too much scope for reduction in cost of funds, and therefore doesn't allow too much scope for reduction in lending rates.
Which brings me, of course, to the next question on ICICI Bank and its lending rates. Is there any scope for you all in going forward? Could borrowers expect any kind of a reduction whatsoever?
First of all, I must say that last April, when RBI started the whole process of, rate cuts, and the first rate cut that was announced in April, we were one of the first banks to actually reduce base rates at that time. And because we believed that the impact of whatever reduction we do on interest rates the benefit should go to all the borrowers, not just the new borrowers. So actually we reduced the base rate at that point in time. Again, from here onwards, I must say that, reductions really depend on the movement in cost of funds, and cost of funds depends on not just policy rates, but the way overall liquidity moves in the system, the way CASA deposits grow in the system, because that has a lot of impact on the cost of funds of the banks. So I think we should just watch the situation, but I must just add that to the extent there is reduction in cost of deposits for banks, you should be rest assured those would be passed on to the borrowers.
Now, in the past, you've been a very big supporter of the kind of moves that the government has been taking on the reforms path, and you've been also quite hopeful that the government would actually deliver on a number of reforms. Going forward, do you expect that the reforms path will continue, given the fact that we're going in to an election year? There are a number of other pressures that the government needs to take care of. Firstly, how many more reforms do you really expect? And secondly, are you kind of satisfied with the kind of reforms that have already taken place?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that the path of reforms will continue, actually, whether elections or not, and, how the governments get formed. If you see the history of India, even with, changes in government, even with the pressures of coalition and so on, I think the path of reforms has always continued, and, no government has really taken a U-turn on reforms just because the elections are to come or just after the elections. But I think what is most critical for us today is not just the direction of reforms, it is the pace of implementation. And, the more time we lose in implementation, that much amount of growth we are sacrificing. And, that is the risk that we are then lending ourselves into, of saying, we live in longer periods of lower growth. So to me, it's not really the big reforms that I'm really worried about today. What I think our priority should be is to make sure that we take decisions every day, so that we get most of those half-complete projects into a completed mode. We get those projects to start generating, producing, and therefore generating cash flows. I mean, if we have power projects that are implemented but are not producing power because either coal or gas is not available, I think we don't really need to look at big reforms, but we just need to focus on saying, how do we solve the problem of availability of coal? And suddenly we will have 15,000 megawatts of power being produced and supplied in the country. And in my view, when you have 18,000 of megawatts being additionally produced and supplied in the country, it's not just the GDP increase because of this production in power, but it's also because this ensures that so many companies that are facing power cuts today start producing. It's a multiplier effect that gets created in the economy. And in my view, just this one thing, if we solve the problem of coal being available to existing power plants, we can add 1% to the GDP of India.
So it's interesting that you talk about power, because that's been another source of pain for the entire banking sector, and it's been one of the few sectors that has seen a lot of restructuring also. So I'd just like to understand firstly, how is this whole issue of power companies been working out for the banking sector, and also going forward, do you expect that this sector would actually come back on track and start improving, and of course it's going to have a multiplier effect on the economy?
Clearly, first of all, it's not as if the entire power sector exposure has been a problem for the banks. In fact, if you just look at our own exposure to the power industry, more than 50% of our exposure to the power sector is to companies which are continuing to generate power. They have the cash flows, they're servicing their debt, and so on and so forth. So, there are different kind of power projects. Some of them are actually performing very well. Some of them have reached a situation where the project is complete, but we need to make sure they get their raw materials so that they can start producing. So, to your larger question of, will all these projects actually be good projects for the long run? Clearly they will be. I mean, are we saying that in a country like India, if we produce this additional 20,000 or 15,000 megawatts of power today, and every year if we produce additional 15 to 20,000 megawatts of power, is there going to be no demand? I think demand is waiting there, just waiting for the production to happen. So clearly there's an underlying demand for these projects. Clearly there is therefore an underlying economic viability of these projects. It's just that today there are challenges around either the raw material and therefore related challenges to cost of production related to the price at which they're today supposed to sell power. So that's the equation that we have to solve. And if we solve that, in the medium term, why even in the long term? In the medium term, all these projects are going to perform well for the banking industry.
So will this spell better news as far as asset quality is concerned? And also for ICICI Bank, do you think FY14 is going to be a better year for asset quality and also the pace of restructuring going forward?
Even FY12 and 13 have not been that bad a year for us when it comes to asset quality. Even in those most difficult times, our asset quality has been pretty much under control. Our additions to NPA have been pretty much under control. Our credit costs, even last year, that is provisions related to average assets, has been only 66 basis points, which is actually one of very good numbers to have. So I think the asset quality has not really gone out of control, even the way in which the economy has moved. That is not to say that all the problems are over and suddenly in FY14 you will not see additions to restructured assets or NPAs. I think there are still some projects that are going to get restructured. There are still some cases that will become NPAs. But, at least as far as ICICI Bank is concerned, I can say that we will still operate within acceptable levels of provisions, and the concerns of credit quality are not such that will bring a huge burden on the banking system, at least as far as our own assets are concerned.
Right, and also in terms of your restructuring pipeline, like you mentioned, there will be a few accounts going in. Will that be significant? Will it be a lot more than last year, or do you think that this pace will actually start coming down, also given the kind of new norms that the RBI has come out with?
I don't see the pace coming down this year compared to the previous year. So I think in that sense, we should be prepared that there are still projects that have to be restructured. So I don't see the pace suddenly coming down this year. But in any case, after FY15, actually, as per the revised guidelines of RBI, there cannot be any more new restructured assets. So they'll either be performing assets or they would be NPAs.
Mm-hmm. All right, so just a couple of questions on ICICI Bank as a whole. Firstly, in terms of margins, you said that you'd be looking at expanding them this year. How is that working out for you all? And, in this declining interest rate environment, will that be a challenge going forward?
So first of all, I think the last 3-4 years, actually, our performance on net interest margins has been quite creditable. Year on year, we have been able to improve our net interest margins, and FY13, the last year, was the first year where we operated throughout the year above 3% net interest margins, and we closed the year at about 3.11%. Yes, our target is to actually improve that net interest margin by another 10 to 12 basis points in this year. We are trying to achieve that more by optimizing our cost of funds, rather than hoping that lending rates will give us that scope. So we are working on optimizing our cost of funds. We are working on optimizing our mix between domestic and international portfolio. So I think with that, I'm still confident that we would see an improvement in net interest margin by 10 to 12 basis points this year.
Right. So also in terms of credit growth for ICICI Bank, we saw last year really being driven a lot by retail credit, which is a slight departure from the traditional credit growth that we've seen from your bank. Going forward into this year, do you expect that credit growth would be sustained again from the retail side, or could corporate credit be actually picking up in a big way?
No, I think the retail credit growth will overtake the corporate credit growth this year. So, in fact, the corporate book for us has been continuing to grow healthily over the past many years. The retail book has started growing in an accelerated manner only from last year. And this year, actually, I expect that our retail book would grow almost by about 25%. The corporate book will grow by about 15% or so. So overall, our domestic book will grow by about 20%.
So would it be a fair assumption to kind of say that your bank is actually becoming a little more conservative when it comes to lending to corporates. And also, we've seen a lot of banks of late lend only to top-rated corporates and actually give preferable interest rates when it comes to top-rated corporates. Is that some kind of a strategy that you all also apply?
I won't say that it's becoming conservative when it comes to lending to corporates. I think this growth rate is just the result of what's happening in the environment. Corporate growth, you must understand, comes from two factors. One is the increase in working capital requirement of the companies, and the second is requirement for their investments in new projects. So while we continue to remain active in both fields, but we have to recognize the fact that there are hardly any new projects being spoken about today. So all the growth that we get in the corporate sector is really coming only out of one portion, which is the working capital increase. And therefore, I am estimating that this year the corporate growth would be just about 15-16%, whereas we have the capability to grow retail at about 25%. But the years in which project investments have been there, our corporate book has also grown by 30% or upwards of that.
That's true. Also, since you took over the bank, we saw a couple of years where one could actually term it as a kind of a consolidation as far as your book is concerned. Has that consolidation got over, and now could one kind of expect ICICI Bank to be going on full steam ahead as far as all of its lending cylinders are concerned?
Yes, clearly our consolidation phase is over. I mean, our consolidation phase was a very deliberate phase where we wanted to, in a way, recalibrate and adjust the composition of our deposits on one hand and the composition of assets on the other hand. On the deposit side, what we did in those 2 years was reduced our dependence on wholesale deposits and increased the current and savings account deposits substantially and brought that deposits to about 40% of our total deposits. On the asset side, we consciously reduced the unsecured personal loan and credit card book, which had become a very large proportion of our total assets. So now that the two compositions have got recalibrated, in fact, that has resulted in a huge improvement in our profitability parameters. Our return on assets has gone up from about 0.9% to close to 1.7% in the 3.5 years. So from here on, we believe that we have the capability to grow in a profitable, sustainable manner. And that is why, in fact, the growth numbers that we are talking about for this year are higher than what we expect the overall banking growth to be.
International front, you have, of course, a very significant portion of business over there. We've seen you bring back a little bit of capital from a few of your businesses from there. Firstly, if you could explain to us what's the rationale on this, and going forward, are we expecting a lot more capital being brought back from those businesses?
So I think, when we had put capital in these two subsidiaries, we had put the capital assuming a much higher rate of growth of that business. But the way the global events have unfolded in the last 3-4 years or so, we have very consciously calibrated our growth rates in the global geographies. And if the growth rate is slower, that means the capital is actually much more than adequate in those geographies. We are operating at close to about 30% capital adequacy ratio in both these geographies. Therefore, the logic was to bring back some amount of capital because we do not really foresee that the growth rates will become very, very high in the coming few years, given the way the global environment is shaping up. So we got the first tranche of capital back from UK as well as from Canada. Yes, we still have some excess capital, especially in Canada, and we will work towards getting some more capital back.
And in terms of capital raising as a whole, are you looking at any further plans in terms of whether it's an international bond or within the domestic markets?
So we should, distinguish between equity capital and bonds. Bonds, in a way, are just a source of money for us. They are a raw material for a bank. And clearly, I think we'll continuously be issuing bonds, whether in the domestic market or the international market, depending on wherever we find it's most optimum to raise funds at that point in time. So I think that is part of our business growth that will continue to happen all the time. As far as equity is concerned, we actually do not need to raise equity capital for a few years to come because our Tier 1 capital adequacy ratio is very, very strong. As you saw, we have actually some capital even in the subsidiaries which we could bring back. So this gives us the ability to continue to grow for a few years without having to dilute on our equity share capital.
Right, and also just one question in terms of your subsidiaries. We've seen, ICICI Pru Life give up profits this year. It's been a big contributor to your overall profits as far as the dividend income is concerned. Going forward, do you expect a larger contribution from these subsidiaries?
Yeah, I think the subsidiaries have now reached a phase they've reached a scale where they're large players in their respective businesses and reached a profitable model, so they're generating good return on equity. So therefore, you've seen a substantial increase in the dividend from these subsidiaries. Going forward, of course, the dividend would continue to increase, more or less in line with the growth in their businesses.
And the plan of the IPO for ICICI Pru Life, is that still something that you all are actively considering?
In the medium term, definitely we would in a way monetize some amount of our capital that is invested in the ICICI Life company. But the manner in which we list it, how do we do it, would also depend on what happens to the guidelines or the regulations on foreign investments allowed in the insurance companies. So we are waiting for a clarity to emerge on that, whether the FDI investments finally would be 26%, 49%, and accordingly we'll take our call in which way to move forward. So therefore we are not in a hurry to take any step right now. But once these regulations are clearer, we would definitely in the next 2-3 years definitely take that step.
And one issue which, I really can't finish this interview without asking you about is the recent allegations which were made on a number of banks, including yours, about, alleged flouting of various KYC and AML norms. Now the RBI, of course, has finished its scrutiny. You all also did appoint an external agency for that. Just like to understand, now that, the issue is kind of behind you all, what is the fallout of that? How do you all kind of move ahead from here and tighten norms from your side?
So I think the first thing that all the investigations, we did our internal investigation, we appointed an external audit firm, and RBI did its own investigation. I think everything has proven that clearly there are no money laundering instances that are happening. Yes, there are always transactional errors that would happen on a continuous basis, which means that, there's always the scope for continuously tightening your processes. So I think that is a continuous learning. It comes out even out of our internal audit exercises. So we would continue to kind of learn from whatever came out, even from these exercises, and look at gradually tightening our processes. There are some system-level tightenings that RBI has suggested in terms of how do you look at a customer, across their total account relationship basis rather than looking at account-by-account performance. So I think those kind of tightenings the entire system would do. But I think broadly, in fact, what is very reassuring is that all these 3 investigations in a way pointed out that our systems and processes are strong. And, even in relative terms, I think you've seen that the amount of penalty that is imposed on us is lower, which means that there is, that kind of reassurance. But there is no doubt that as a bank, we have to continuously make sure that errors do not occur, that errors go down, and we continue to strengthen our systems processes.
Of course, and you all were on record also saying at that point of time that there's zero tolerance from your end on these issues, and that you all will kind of ensure that these things don't happen really. So just a follow-up question on this would be that is there any need really for banks to kind of ensure that these things are really drilled into the employees at a grassroots level, and really that these things don't kind of happen going forward?
I think clearly there's a learning here. First of all, are these drilled in at the grassroots level? They are clearly drilled in at the systems and processes level. So that is the reason why money laundering transactions don't go through, even if somebody would want them to go through. So I think in that sense, they are drilled into the systems, processes, checks and balances level. But I think, again, a learning for all of us is that at the grassroots level, we should make people more conscious about, laxity in talking. I think it's not just important to make sure that your systems and processes are strong, but it's equally important to make sure that, we do not do loose stock, even though, we know that these transactions will not go through. So I think some more training of people, say in terms of how they should conduct themselves even while talking to the customers, is definitely important.
Right, Ms. Kochhar, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us on ET Now again.
Thank you.